Today we're taking a look at HOA communities. Let's go. What's going on, YouTube? Welcome back to Living in Coastal Delaware. I'm Matt Lunden, your favorite Coastal Delaware realtor, and today we're taking a dive into a little bit of a sticky subject and discussing some HOA community pros and cons to give you an idea if it's the right thing for you. Do me a favor and hit the subscribe button down below if you are new to the channel, and if you are someone that is looking to buy or sell here in Delaware, please do not hesitate to reach out. Now let's dive in. In talking with many of you from across the country, we often have clients that are looking to relocate that start off the conversation with a very assertive, I do not want to live in an HOA community. Often these are driven by some previous experience or horror stories online that they've read about HOAs. But it seems like there is a very stark line in the sand as to I do want to live in an HOA or I do not want to live in an HOA community. And like I said, it's drawn in the sand. The truth is that if you elect to not live in an HOA community here in Coastal Delaware, you will be greatly limiting your housing options and choices. There are about 1,000 to 2,000 HOA communities here in Delaware. And for a small state, it's a pretty big number. So that number actually reflects about 315,000 people that reside in HOA communities. And that brings us to about 32% of our population here in Delaware that live in a subdivision with an HOA. So while HOA subdivisions and planned communities are certainly more prevalent in certain parts of the state, and these facts do give you the entirety of the state, there's definitely a large percentage of the population that is currently living in subdivisions, and I just wanted to give you guys a little bit more information on why being in an HOA has some benefits and some drawbacks, and maybe you can make a decision on whether or not it's the right thing for you. The first thing to take a look at is property values. HOAs are designed to make the home values in that subdivision hold their value. So the rules surrounding the HOA typically reflect certain aesthetic items that you need to make sure that you're maintaining and following to make sure that that community does not start to look run down or beat up. These are things like making sure your lawn is trimmed, making sure you don't have broken down cars or boats or RVs, anything like that in your driveway. The guidelines set by the HOA are just designed, again, to make sure that your community has values that maintain themselves and you don't have a neighbor that's plummeting your values by making their house a trash heap. Again, the biggest things that we see that the HOAs dictate here are going to be what you can do with the outside of your home, what color it can be, what style you can have your fence, what height you can have your fence, if you can park something in your driveway, if you can have a rental and how long those rentals need to be. So all of these items are just designed, again, around making sure that your community's property values stay at a certain level, and it maintains the aesthetic of the neighborhood and is kept to a certain standard. The money that you pay into your HOA goes towards taking care of your common grounds and insurance for those common grounds, making sure those areas are maintained by the landscaping company. And then if your community has amenities such as pools, tennis courts, basketball courts, fitness centers, all that, again, they use those funds to pay for the insurance for those areas. And the homes, like I said, in HOA communities typically hold their value better than those outside of the HOA. So those standards definitely help the value of the homes. And if you, on average, if you were to take the same exact home and just duplicate it, so everything's the same, put one in an HOA and take the other one and put it outside the HOA, the one that's in the HOA would typically, on average, sell for a higher price than the one outside of the HOA. So they certainly have a benefit in maintaining your property values. The biggest concern that we have when we hear from clients moving to the area, and the biggest complaint I get is, people worried about the strict rules in the HOAs. Something that I've heard quite a few times, to be honest with you, is I don't want someone coming by my house every other day with a tape measure and making sure that I cut my grass to the correct height. Now, while there's definitely some HOAs that have more strict rules than others, I can say that I've never seen anybody walking around with a tape measure measuring grass. Not to say it hasn't happened. I'm sure it has somewhere, but I've not seen it. So as with everything, you're gonna have extremes on both ends. Some people are gonna be too lax and some people are gonna be too strict, but the majority of the communities fall right in the middle of the spectrum where, there's some rules, but nobody's gonna be too crazy about them as long as you're keeping up with your property. You don't have a bunch of broken down cars in your lawn and your house isn't hot pink, and you follow all their guidelines. No one's gonna bother you. No one's gonna be measuring your grass as long as you keep it cut. And truth be told, the majority of these communities actually have grass maintenance or lawn care included in the HOA price. So typically you don't even have to worry about that item. But if you do have to mow your grass and you plan to do it on Monday because that fits your schedule, but you forget to do it Monday and you end up doing it Tuesday, no one's gonna be out there measuring your grass if you miss it by a day or two. The main thing there is they just don't want it where a house has grass that's 2 or 3 feet tall and it just starts to look run down in the community. The most common rules that we see here in HOA communities along the coast typically pertain to colors and styles of the exterior home. If rentals are allowed, and if so, how long is the minimum stay and what are the requirements around that? And then what can be parked in your driveway and for how long? Can you have a RV or a boat in that parking lot and so on and so forth? For example, in my neighborhood, you have to have if you have a rental, it's got to be for at least a 30-day minimum period. So you can't do any weekly vacation rentals or anything like that. If you've got a work vehicle that's got any logos on the outside, it does have to be parked in your garage. It cannot be left in your driveway. And then you can't park an RV or a boat in your driveway, except for when you're unloading or loading it for the day to go on a trip or go boating or whatever you're going to be doing. So, many people simply just don't want to be told what they can and can't do. I get that. That's fine. There's, chocolate and vanilla ice cream for everybody. Everybody's got their own preference, and, sometimes the slightest rules may just be against what somebody wants to do. But for the most part, most of the rules are pretty middle of the road, and they're just making sure that the property and the neighborhood is properly maintained. The second major concern that we hear is going to be with the cost associated with the HOA and what those fees are on a monthly basis. The big thing there is that these fees can range quite a bit, to be honest with you. We've got some communities where they're $100 a year, and we've got some communities where they're $600 a month. So that's certainly a very big difference. Typically, if you're on the lower end of those fees, your community is likely just going to have less amenities, less things that are included, such as lawn care and that kind of stuff, and you're going to have fewer rules and regulations. If you're looking to live in a subdivision on the higher end of that, the closer to that $600 a month or whatever that number may be, typically it's going to be more of a resort style community. So you're going to have something with pools, tennis courts, fitness centers, basketball courts, lawn care included, that kind of stuff. So you're just going to have a lot more items if that number is higher. More often, those at the higher end are also going to be more strict about the rules, and you're likely going to have someone that's on your tail a little bit more about following those rules. There are nice homes in both those lower HOA number and higher HOA numbered communities, but the communities with the higher HOA fees tend to also be higher cost homes. I'm not saying that's a live by it, die by it rule. It just tends to be the trend that we see. Two things to keep in mind when you start looking at homes in the area. If you're looking at new construction, I would say about 95% of them are going to be in HOA communities. So it's just something to keep in mind as you start your search. And then number two there is that here in the state of Delaware, we have what's called the Delaware Uniform Common Interest Ownership Act. And basically what that does, it's a buyer beware type of deal where once you're under contract, the seller has 10 days to furnish all the rules and regulations, the finances for the community, all that stuff to the buyer. And then as a buyer, you've got 5 days to review those. I would take the time, make sure you're reading all the rules, make sure you're reading the finances, because once you get through that period, you're locked into whatever those are. So if you're someone that only likes blue front doors, but the community requires red front doors, maybe that's a deal breaker for you. But just go ahead, make sure you read all the rules, because once you move in, you are going to be stuck with whatever those rules are. And the finance as well, you obviously don't want to be buying into something that's hemorrhaging cash and losing money hand over fist. So just make sure you're fully aware of what's going on within that community before you go to closing. And now, I'd just like you to let me know down in the comments, what are your thoughts on HOAs? Would you live in one? Would you not live in one? What are some horror stories that you've heard? Or, maybe what are some things that you've seen where you've previously lived? I would love to know. So please sound off down in the comments and let me know. And then if you've made it this far, obviously you like the content a little bit, or you wouldn't have made it this far into the video of me rambling. So I'd appreciate you hitting the subscribe button down below and hitting that notification bell next to it so you can stay in the loop each week when we go live discussing all things Coastal Delaware. And if you or someone you know is looking to buy or sell here in Delaware, all my information is right here on the screen and down below in the description. So please do not hesitate to reach out. I look forward to seeing you guys next time. Peace.